This is the first live stream of 2025, of course. Lots to talk about, I think. Lots been going on in the Formula One world, and I'm sure there'll be some questions and comments about that as we go ahead. It won't be the longest live stream I've ever done in my life, and that is partly because it is, and I hope if the sound is a bit echoey, more echoey than it normally is, excuse me, because I'm actually in the process of changing studios, completely revamping the entire thing. In fact, we're moving house as well. So it's been a really, really hectic Christmas, New Year period, and we're only about halfway through that. But it does involve having a brand new studio, which I'm looking forward to having, obviously, when we get it all finished, but it could be a while. In the meantime, I'm in the old studio, which is all stripped down. No more books, no more paraphernalia, no more memorabilia, nothing here. And it sounds a bit echoey as a result. So I hope the sound is okay, but that's the reason it probably doesn't sound quite as good as normal. So what's been going on? Yeah, the news. Everybody was captivated, I think, by this picture yesterday put out by Ferrari of Lewis's first day as a Ferrari driver, looking very cool by the F40 at Fiorano, dressed appropriately, I think, as befits somebody who would have been dining with Enzo Ferrari circa, I don't know, 1947 in Modena, in a restaurant there or a cafe. That's about the sort of attire I think they used to have. Very, very good, Lewis. Excellent. And yeah, I mean, I think that's a great picture, isn't it? He could have done a million things with Lewis Hamilton. He could have been in all these sort of Mercedes, Tommy Hilfiger attire. But no, very, discreet and respectful. And I love the overcoat, actually. Looks great. Not sure about the F40. I suppose that's the car that... Is it an F40? I think it is. I was never a fan of that. I would have had a Magnum spec 328 GTS, I think. Something like that. Or maybe a Lorenzo Bandini spec 66 Dino circa, from the Nürburgring 1,000 kilometers. That would have been cool. Or maybe even a flat 12 312 PB Ferrari Formula One car. Anyway, that's the one they've got. So no real problems with that at all. And we wait with bated breath, obviously, to see him in the car and to see how he looks in the car. As I predicted, but as I've been saying for quite a long time, Lewis is just going to love being at Ferrari. He's going to love everything about it. Win, lose or draw, he's going to love this time of his career because for sure he'll love the country, he'll love the tifosi, he'll love the food, he'll love the clothes, he'll love everything about it. And he'll love being a Ferrari driver. And it's, he will be a Ferrari driver as nobody else has ever been a Ferrari driver. Easy to say that, I think. But that's Lewis, isn't it? He's going to absolutely change the way Ferrari drivers look and think and feel. What does Charles Leclerc think about all that? That's a good question. He's probably back at Monaco, but probably preparing to watch the Monte Carlo rally, I would imagine. So there you go. Now, what else have we got? In moving, the great thing is I've been able to take everything out of storage now. So although I had a lot of books and memorabilia here, I guess it was only about 50% of what I actually have. And the other 50% is now in the new house, waiting to be filed and properly displayed. But I keep coming across interesting things. And I've mentioned this a few times, actually. I thought I'd just show this. This is a poster. Well, it's a beautiful sketch done by my friend Chuck Queener, wonderful artist, I think. I love his touch. And we became good friends. He published a great magazine called Cavallino, which I wrote for. And yeah, just a great guy. Anyway, he gave me that poster, if you like, that drawing in 79 at Watkins Glen. So I had it in my hand after the race when Gilles had retired with a blown engine. As I think I've mentioned, piston went. And I went up to him and he was obviously really annoyed about the whole thing because he could have won it. And I said, Gilles, will you sign this? And he looked at me and he laughed and he said, for sure it was you that had something to do with that blown piston, because we always had a bit of a laugh about his 78 season when I was obviously very close to Carlos, but we became very good friends as well, Carlos and Jill and I. And And he was always amazed whenever Carlos was quicker, and he always blamed me for doing something to his car or something like that. Obviously, I had nothing to do in '79 with his car. Carlos was at Lotus by then. But anyway, he said, for sure it was you, bloody Peter, and your piston. You had something to do with that piston. So he wrote in, laughing his head off, to bloody Peter, Gilles Villeneuve, laughing as he did it, as I say. So, yeah, I didn't know where that had got to, but I'm very pleased to have found it now. And apropos nothing at all, other than it was Christmas, this was my pièce de résistance Christmas present. I really have loved receiving this book. It's absolutely superb. Probably quite difficult to get, I think, but if you Google it, I'm sure it's out there. Beautiful coffee table book, incredibly well printed and laid out, and lovely artwork. And Alejo Perez Monsalvo, my friend, very kindly sent me a copy, but just superb. I'd forgotten. And it's about Alessandro de Tomaso, who created his own empire, Argentine businessman, I guess, but businessman, racer, engineer. He's a pretty quick racing driver in his early days, and then very good engineer. And obviously the single-seater thing is very tainted by Piers' accident at Zandvoort in '70. But these F2 cars were very good, and the F1 car, had that not happened, probably would have been okay as well. I'd forgotten really until I read the book that Piers was on the point of going to Ferrari in '70 and had a proper Ferrari offer, Formula One and sports cars, but stayed with Frank Williams, partly because they were mates and they all clubbed together. And Frank, of course, spoke fluent Italian, and Piers had already driven the Di Tommaso F2 car in '69 and gone pretty well in a race or two. But the Ferrari offer involved sports cars, so it was a much bigger thing in terms of money. Frank wasn't going to pay Piers too much money. But at the last minute, Alfa Romeo came in and offered Piers a sports car drive for '70, which kind of matched the total Ferrari package then. So he did that. How different history would have been had he gone to Ferrari, of course. Great, it was very sad to remember that, actually. And as for Alessandro de Tomaso, a completely different sort of guy. And when you think about the Pantera and the Mangusta, and the Pantera with the Ford 5.7 litre V8 Ford engine, I think it had, great car. And not many people were doing that sort of imaginative empire building back in those days. Anyway, that's my preamble. This really is your show as ever, and it's great to be live again. So with no more ado, let's start to have a look at some of your questions, and I will bring them up. The first one up is from Alex G. Lewis, emotional arrival at Maranello on my 54th birthday. Oh, well, that's nice, isn't it? Did anything else happen yesterday? Don't think so. No, nothing important in America, was it? I never thought this would be so special. He was so humble. Tifosi will love him, I'm sure. Well, I think you're absolutely right, Alex. No doubt at all about that. I think the Tifosi will take to him in the way they took, in a completely different way, to Nigel Mansell. And, that's the way the Italians are. They just accept people for who they are. And Lewis has his own style and his own way of doing things. And he'll be incredibly popular in Italy as a result. He'll be popular. He'll continue to be popular right around the world. Okay, this is from Aaron Lee. Hey, Peter, are there more in-season car upgrades now, or is it just social media that makes them more visible to the wider public? No, I don't think there are any more. They're just, the teams now have to fill in a form, I guess, with the FIA to do with upgrades on the car and why they're doing it. And it's quite good, isn't it? So it's all out there on social media. But all that was taking place beforehand. It's just that we never really saw it in such precise affirmative detail, if that's the right word. And so, yeah, I think it's quite a good thing. It's quite a good thing when the upgrades are all, tiny little things here and tiny little aero things there. They're not, oh, we've moved the gearbox and weight distribution and gone from a flat 12 to a V12, as it used to be. But yeah, it's good to have the FIA on top of that, and I quite enjoy that, looking at all that. But the social media then expands it all and does a pretty good job with it, I think, in general. The people out there do a very good job. So, and obviously for 26, it's going to be completely different because it's a whole new category of Formula One, and obviously the cars will be completely different, and then there will be different types of upgrades as well. They won't necessarily all be aero, I wouldn't have thought. It's interesting, isn't it, that most of the upgrades, well, all of the upgrades actually, that are submitted to the FIA, and presumably you can't have an upgrade without submitting it, are all aero. But I suspect from 26 onwards, they may not be all aero. Okay, this is from Aaron as well. As far as I remember, as recently as a few months ago, the electric vehicle EV part of the 2026 PU seemed almost impossible to achieve in terms of power-weight ratio to what has been achieved anywhere else in the world. Have you heard any updates on this? And was this the first time a set of regulations has gone so far beyond the capabilities of technology at the time? Just going to get that a little bit higher, actually. There you go. How about that? Doing that while I speak. Pretty cool, eh? Yeah, I mean, I was talking to Phil Prue about this, and I got the impression that there was nothing going on that they hadn't already sort of talked about amongst themselves, and they weren't being caught by surprise or jumping in at too deep an end of a swimming pool, and that everything was more or less kind of achievable. It's just that we're talking about Formula One, and we're not talking about the motor industry, and Formula One obviously has far fewer constraints in terms of the pace at which it operates, and obviously the results it's trying to achieve. You know, that it's nothing to do with money as such. It's to do with performance and efficiency. And so I think, yeah, it was one sure way that the whole EV sector was going to be energized would be if Formula One got hold of it. A bit like, you know, COVID and masks and breathing systems that F1 very quickly brought to the fore. Because there are brilliant people in Formula One. The whole pit lane is full of brilliant people, and they're all thinking very quickly and very imaginatively within the realms of what they can do. And that's what we're going to see with EV. Me, I'd like to see, as a result of Formula One having this new regulation in 26, I'd like to see an EV, electric car, with a range of a minimum of 1,000 miles, let's call it 1,600 kilometers, weighing no more than 1,000 kilos. Yep. That's not going to happen, I don't think. I mean, I did talk to Peter Wright about that, and he said, you know, weight is one thing that is never going to be an easy part of the EV package. And that's very sad, isn't it? Being a Colin Chapman disciple, I've always believed in lightweight and low center of gravity, agility, stiff chassis, supple suspension, low disallowed, which weighs less than a current Formula One car, of course. The Sheriff of Sandovote, who presumably has hopefully been at Sandovote watching the opening procedure of the opening ceremony of the Monte Carlo rally. Good place to watch from, I would have thought. Nothing fast going on there, but lots of parading and photographs, and the FA president standing with all the drivers, even though he's never been to a rally, a current rally since he's been president, and he's been offered seats in rally cars and turned them down. Anyway, yeah, Sheriff of Sandovote. Peter, what do you think of the Netflix series on Senna? I'm disappointed it wasn't really unrealistic if we didn't see our Peter interviewing Senna somewhere. Well, I didn't see it. For those who've been watching my channel for quite a long time, I don't even know what Netflix is really. I don't subscribe. There's too much other stuff. I just don't have. The reason I don't is nothing against it, of course. It's just that I just don't have time to sit down and watch all these movies. So I don't see the need for it. I can't even keep up with what's going on in the cricket or the tennis, the Australian Open, Alcaraz versus Djokovic, or the golf or anything else. So no time for all that. But the reason I don't think I ever interviewed Senna. I sat down with him a lot. I had dinner with him a few times, and we got to know him very well in Formula 4 days and Formula 3 days. But in terms of formally interviewing as a journalist, I wasn't a journalist. Well, I was a journalist when he was in Formula 4, Formula 3, Formula Ford 2000. But when he got into Formula 1 in 84, I was still writing. But I interviewed him, yeah, for sure, but not for TV or anything like that. So I guess that's what. Here, this is actually what I was doing. If you want to have a look, where are we? In 92. This is what I wasn't interviewing. There you see, there's Ayrton, Nigel and Gerhard on the podium. The last win in 92. My last win, you could say. There I am on the podium with them. And yeah, used to have a lot of fun with Ayrton. There he looked as he usually looked after a race, coughing slightly, like he'd given it 100%. Gerhard, look how stern Gerhard looks in that picture. You know why that is, of course. That's because he had that horrendous shunt with Riccardo Patrese. Nigel's teammate, our other driver, which I was on the pit wall, and there was, we were all just ducking for cover. The car just cartwheeled right down the pit guardrail at a time when there was nothing like the same protection for pit lane personnel as there is today. And that was caused ultimately, in my opinion, by Gerhard, because Ricciardo was all over him and had a couple of goes to get past. And as they came out of that last corner, it was obvious to Gerhard that Ricciardo was going to go right in behind him and just flick out with a toe. No DRS in those days. And Gerhard was coming into the pits that lap and just slowed down just as Ricciardo was pulling out. And Ricciardo clipped his left rear with his right front and cartwheeled down the straight. Reminds me of Niki Lauda a little bit. When was that? Must have been 78 Long Beach Grand Prix, which Carlos won in the Ferrari. But he was very annoyed with Niki because something had happened to Niki's engine or something, which meant he was actually going to go straight on at the end of the back straight. And Carlos was right behind him. And Niki didn't put his hand up to say, I'm going to stop or move over. He was braking to a point well beyond the corner because he was just going to go straight off into the runoff area and park the car. And Carlos knew Niki was trying to lead Carlos into going off. And those were the days when hand signals were pretty much normal. And as I said in my last live stream, I think we should bring back a congratulatory award for drivers that do start to use hand signals and say thank you, as distinct from waving their fist or giving two fingers or whatever they normally do. Sheriff of the Sound of Vote, continuing. What do you think of France's history in Formula One and the drivers it has produced from Seber to Prost to Gasly and now Isaac? I hope that with LMVH replacing Rolex, we'll see a French Grand Prix again. Well, yeah, don't hold your breath on that one. And we got Mercedes in Formula One, and they didn't manage to keep the German Grand Prix going, did they? So if LMVH are there, I can't imagine they're going to be able to spend more money than Mercedes could have spent having a German Grand Prix. But anyway, yeah, shame to see Rolex going, isn't it? Real class act, Rolex, and everything they do. And for me, Formula One needed that. It's always a nice thing to have that. You can have all your other, you can have your cryptocurrency and all that other stuff. But if you got Rolex there, it was always a nice foundation for Formula One's persona. But then, it's now gone. So there you go. France's history and its tapestry of drivers over the years. I've often talked about Boyo, the Boyo brothers, actually, going back to 1914, and Jules Gu won, Indy and Formula One, or Formula One Grande Épreuve, you would call it then. France, Renault brothers, going right back to the beginning. Look at how incredibly imaginative the Renault brothers were with their voiturette. And it was France that really gave us motorsport, because it gave us all those lovely road races, dangerous as they were. Was it Paris-Madrid, I think, when Marcel Renault was killed? 16, I think. Maybe before that, actually, just hit a bump and was thrown out of the car and was killed, as used to happen in those days. Those road races were unbelievably dangerous. But that's where it all began. It began there with Peugeot, with Renault, particularly, but with many other manufacturers as well. And from that came a whole array of drivers of enormous talent. Jean-Pierre Vimil, for me, was always one of the great drivers. And there have been many others too. And you've mentioned some of the more recent ones, Seber to Prost to Gasly. There have been so many great French drivers. So what do I think about France's history in Formula One? I think there should be a French Grand Prix. And I'm very happy if it comes back to Ricard, and I think it should be there. But at the same time, I think we should have a German Grand Prix. I think it's absolutely ridiculous we don't have a German Grand Prix in Formula One. We have a Belgian Grand Prix continuing its history in Formula One. Good to see that. But I'd love to see a French Grand Prix again. We have a Monaco Grand Prix. I guess that's the nearest we have to it. But that whole French thing. And just think about Jean-Pierre Jabouille and what he did with the Renault Turbo team when it was a proper Formula One team. I say proper Formula One team. Today, a shadow of its former self with Mercedes engines. But when it was Renault and it was Alain Prost or René Arnoux and it was Jacques Lafitte. They were racing in the Ligiers, or Didier Pironi, or Patrick Depailler. So many, Johnny Sebos-Gavin, so many great French drivers. And I have enormous respect for all of them. Very good friends with many of them as well. So yeah, thanks for mentioning that. Just a nice little interlude to talk about the contribution of France to Formula One, and fitting that the FIA is still based in Paris. Still absolutely astounding to me that the honor of the first World Championship Grand Prix was actually given to Silverstone and not the French Grand Prix. Amazing that, isn't it? I think we should thank Earl Howe for that. He did a lot of lobbying within the House of Lords, I guess, and got the King and Queen to attend. And once the King and Queen had confirmed their attendance, then it was a done deal. The British Grand Prix was going to be the first ever round of the World Championship. Imagine today the hoopla that would be around a race if we'd never had a World Championship until this year, and suddenly the opening round of the World Championship was going to be the Australian Grand Prix in Melbourne. Can you imagine what that would be like? Wow. Seema Dragon. Hi, Peter. Hi there. Message retracted from NSG27. Another one from the Sheriff of Sandervoort. Peter, you're confident Charles will beat Lewis if Ferrari has the fastest car, but no Ferrari driver has ever beaten a champion teammate to a title, with Massa being the last to come close. Really? Yeah, I don't think that stat's particularly relevant to the Lewis-Charles matchup, because, well, just for no reason, really. I just don't think it's appropriate. I mean, there's a lot of stats. I always think it's quite funny when we go to, I don't know, the whatever race, the Hungarian Grand Prix, and they talk about a driver's record at the Hungarian Grand Prix. Fernando Alonso has got a great record, a terrible record in Hungary. Of course, it's irrelevant because it's based on what car he was driving at the time, and a lot of other factors. It's nothing to do with whether he goes well in Hungary, any more than, that stat about no Ferrari driver has ever beaten a champion teammate to a title. I mean, yeah, but I think if the car is good, as I say, I think Charles would win the champion. If there's a championship to be won by a Ferrari that's good enough to win a championship, big mouthful there, but you can hear what I'm saying. I think it'll be Charles Leclerc over a season that'll do that. I think, given that car, Lewis will also win races for sure. But if it's a bad car, I think Charles will probably have the better of Lewis over a season. I think that over a season in italics is a very important point, because Lewis could easily win the first two Grand Prix of 2025. But it doesn't mean to say Charles Leclerc's going to go away or he's not going to be quick. If he's winning the first two races, it means the car's pretty good. If the car's pretty good, Charles Leclerc is going to be there, believe me. So, and if you're thinking that the Lewis at Ferrari is going to be the Lewis that was dominating races at Mercedes, think again, because the reason he was dominating at Mercedes is because he had a very good teammate that allowed him to do that for most of the time. Obviously not Nico Rosberg, but Valtteri Bottas. And he had a great car. So it's not detracting from Lewis in any way. I'm just saying that's not the situation at Ferrari. Charles Leclerc is not Valtteri Bottas, I'm afraid. He's much, much quicker. So here we go. More questions. Roberto Antonelli. Hi, Peter. Welcome back. Wow. Thank you, Roberto. And looking forward to seeing your namesake performing in the Mercedes. Wonder how you'll go. Quite a lot of pressure on these young guys, isn't there? Least of all, Jack Doohan. Oof. What is that all about? Jack Doohan confirmed as the race driver for Alpine, and he's barely had time to sort of, I don't know, go out and have a pizza with his mates. Then the news comes that Franco Colapinto is going to be waiting in the wings and probably will be in the car within 5 or 6 races, knowing Flavio Briatore. I mean, remember what Flavio did to Roberto Moreno in 91. Roberto was doing a really good job. I think he finished second in his first race for Benetton from memory, Japan or something like that. And anyway, he had some good placings, P4s and stuff like that. And suddenly, Michael Schumacher was on the market, and Flav just immediately sent him off to Minardi and put Schumacher in the car. No compunction whatsoever. And there's so much hoopla around Franco Colapinto. I can see that happening again. I hope it doesn't, because I think Jack deserves this opportunity. And there's nothing worse than putting pressure on like this on a young guy. You should just let him find his feet and get on with it. And Jack Doohan's a different sort of racing driver to most, and I'm sure Flav doesn't realize that, but he's got a massive heart. He's a real racer in terms of going for it and just trusting himself. And he's a bit of a Liam Lawson like that, I think, perhaps even more so. And it'd be a great shame if he's ousted very early on. I hope it doesn't happen. I really don't. He really deserves that chance. Anyway, Emu Warrior, g'day from Melbourne, Australia. G'day. Good to have the Aussies on board. As I say, quite a lot going on in the Aussie Open at the moment, isn't there? Anyway, let's focus on what we're doing here. This is the NSG27 who deleted the other one. Good morning, Peter. Happy New Year. Thank you very much. Great to see another live stream. Many people seem to be either a Lewis fan or a Max fan. On pure driving talent ability, who, in your opinion, is the better? Well, yeah, I mean, everything's very polarized these days. That's a very, overused word already, isn't it? Polarization of social media. But yeah, everything is very polarized. And it seems ridiculous to me that if you're a Lewis fan, you're not allowed to be a Max fan. It's just pathetic, isn't it? I think it's probably all come from football or something like that. I don't know. I'm not a football guy, so I can't really say. But it seems to me that a lot of the fans don't go because they love matches, because they love football. They go there for their team, and they hate the other team, and they hate the supporters of the other team. And it's all sort of spread from there. I've always said, I mean, certainly for the last, I don't know how many, 7 or 8 years, that for me there are 3 drivers that still stand head and shoulders above the rest, and they're Lewis, Max, and Charles. And I think all 3 of them are different, and they drive differently, but all 3 of them are under the spectrum of short corners, braking to the slowest point of the corner, incredible manipulation of the pedals and the steering, more the pedals and the steering to get to that point and to get to the correct rotation point, and then incredibly clean on exit as well. Very soft touch, very supple inputs, and very, very good in terms of being able to react to all the variables going on around them. I put those 3 still above the rest. I put them above Lando and George. I think obviously Lewis in that situation last year alongside George, the last couple of 3 years, alongside George in a difficult Mercedes, was never going to stretch it on the line. And I think he was a bit confused by everything that was going on after a while because nothing seemed to work. And anyway, George was always stretching the car to the absolute limit, which was difficult for Lewis to match at this stage of his career. But in terms of Lewis's vocabulary in the car and what he can do in the car, I think he's still got it all 100% for sure. And between Lewis and Max, in terms of pace, very, very little even now, I would say. And you can't compare what Max was doing in a Red Bull compared with Lewis in a Mercedes, even when the Red Bull was on a bad day. They're very different cars, very different things going on there, and very different situation for the team, for the drivers within the teams anyway. I think for Lewis, it changed when Bottas was replaced by Russell. And that, in a way, it took away Lewis's ability to be as self-critical as he has been throughout his career, because he was starting to have to relate everything to George rather than to what he felt about the car. And that's not a good thing, really. I think at Ferrari, he'll be more of his own man again and looking for what he wants in the car, especially if it's a better car and a reasonable car. But yeah, Charles, I think, is there. And Max, you wanted me to say Max is quicker or Lewis is quicker. Probably I'd give it to Max, but I still think Lewis in a good car will be right there with Max, actually. But in a bad car, I'd say Max is quicker. I think you always have to have that proviso in there. Polish Eddie. For a teammate to beat his teammate, why does the car have to be the fastest? It's equal for both of them. Quite sure who says the car has to be the fastest. And it is equal. And that's why teammate comparisons are so important. That's why Fernando Alonso was not very keen to keep Jarno Trulli in the car. Not because he was beating Fernando, but he was uncomfortably close. And I wondered over the winter, in terms of Red Bull not doing the obvious thing and signing Carlos Sainz to replace Sergio Perez, whether that all goes back to the year that Max and Carlos had at Toro Rosso, because Carlos was actually not occasionally, 20% of the time quicker than Max in qualifying, and he was right there when he wasn't quicker than Max. He was in a tenth or two, and he was uncomfortably near Max. And I wonder whether that's one of the reasons Max, and maybe they just didn't get on and they fell out over that for some reason, and maybe there was a setup or something that Carlos didn't tell Max about or something. Who knows what might have happened. But I think it goes back to that Toro Rosso period. Max saying to Red Bull, I don't want Carlos in the other car. I think that's obviously what happened. So those teammate things, yeah, they're very important. And, that's why Lewis will be looking for a new clean sheet of paper after his record against George this last year. And that's why teammates, play such an important role. And because of new media, social media really, and because of statistics on everybody's fingertips, it's very easy for everyone to start clamoring for a team to have the two best drivers. But as I've often said, that having Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri isn't necessarily the best thing for McLaren, or certainly not the best thing for Lando Norris, that's for sure, and getting the best from Lando Norris. In the same way that having George alongside Lewis wasn't the best way to get the ultimate from Lewis Hamilton. So yeah, teammates are very, very important. And how you handle that is up to you. And if you you can do the Daniel Ricciardo thing and look at the teammate in the same car and realize what an uphill struggle it's going to be and just give up and leave and go for the money, and Renault, as he did. Or you can battle on and learn from that. And very few do in Formula One. Most racing drivers have been brought up to think that they are the quickest thing on the planet Earth, and if they are not on the pole, there must be something wrong with the car. I think that's kind of been Sergio Perez's problem over the last 2 or 3 years. I'm not sure he thought he was the fastest driver on the planet Earth, but I definitely think he felt that he was quicker than the team were allowing him to look. And once you start thinking that way, it's a slippery slope downhill, definitely. So teammates, yeah, very difficult how to handle teammates. And I think, one thing that I think Lewis fans should be encouraged about is that Charles Leclerc is quite a mature guy. And I think Lewis will appreciate that compared with George, who was, the young lion in the other car. And it's a different thing. And from Lewis's point of view, he'll appreciate and enjoy having Charles as a teammate much more than he did having George, I believe. It's his thing, but I think Charles is a more mature guy, and Lewis will be more able to sort of learn from Charles if he needs to. And equally, as I say, to go back to his thing of being self-critical and building up a team around himself, his own car, his part of the garage, and getting the car to his liking. I think he'll have much more confidence in doing that, rather than Mercedes, where this young guy comes in and just starts going quicker all the time, which was very difficult to fight. Zishan Asfar, Peter, how hard will it be for Lewis to adjust from Mercedes to Ferrari in terms of the technical side of things? What, in your opinion, is the biggest challenge he'll face? I don't think it'll be difficult at all. There'll be a different way of doing things, obviously. Probably fewer committees, and he'll be able to go straight to the top a lot more than he could at Mercedes, I suspect. I mean, he's obviously got a really close relationship with Freddie Vasseur. And, I think it's Freddie Vasseur who's put this deal together, to be honest. And so, there's Lewis with a guy that he can really, really rely on and trust, and with whom he's worked and had a lot of success with in the past. And Freddie knows what Lewis needs and wants from a car and what brings the best out in Lewis. And so I think he'll find it. I think you'll hear Lewis saying, I'm pleasantly surprised. I don't want to compare it with Mercedes, but I love working here. It's amazing. The people, the mechanics, the engineers. I think he's going to be all over it. And I think a lot of that will be real, because it's more about people probably at Ferrari than it is at Mercedes. And Lewis is good at that. He's good with people and understanding psychologies, a little bit like Michael Schumacher in that respect. And I think he'll see all of a sudden, he'll be bringing together all of his experiences from McLaren and Mercedes, different teammates, different engineers, different team principals, and putting all that together and applying it at Ferrari through the brain of Freddie Vasseur. And I think it'll go really well. I really do. I think it'll be brilliant. Looking forward to it. As I said at the time, I'd love to be at Ferrari now. I'd even, as I say, I'd be quite happy to work in the motorhome, cleaning the dishes in the back kitchen there, just to be a part of that Ferrari team with Charles and Lewis. I think it's absolutely brilliant. Biggest challenge he will face? Well, the biggest challenge he will face is, I suppose, people saying, well, you know, you're slower than Charles Leclerc, or Charles Leclerc's just won 3 races in a row. What do you think about that, Lewis? But I think he'll be ready for that because, you know, it's the back end of his career. And every time he goes nearly as quick or quicker than Charles or wins a race, it's a massive thing for Lewis. And when he's slightly behind him and Charles is winning, yeah, okay, that's kind of what a lot of people expect should happen anyway. I mean, Charles is the incumbent driver and he's very, very good. So I think Lewis will be very good at that and very good at handling that. I mean, if you look at another example in rallying right now, you've got obviously Terry Newville, who's just won the championship, but he's got a new teammate, a little bit like George Russell joining Mercedes. He's got Adrian Formeau joining Hyundai. Now, it could be that Formeau might luck into winning, say, the first 2 rallies. And the big pressure point then certainly for Newville is going to be, does he need to go faster and push harder, or does he just relax and be confident in himself that over a season he can still do it? And I don't know. The jury's out yet at the moment, obviously, as to how Terry would react to that situation. I suspect he'll be fine. But I know that if that happens in Lewis's case with Charles, I think he'll be completely relaxed about it. I don't think it'll get to him. And I don't think he's going to have a lot of challenges there, apart from the usual ones of trying to win every race in the World Championship. You know, that sounds fatuous, doesn't it? But you know what I'm saying. I don't think it's anything specifically Ferrari-esque anymore, because Lewis is kind of bigger than the media these days. The whole Lewis media platform is much bigger than the normal press media platform, you know, the daily papers and all that rubbish. It's, you know, it's a huge thing. And Lewis doesn't need to do any interviews anymore. He just does his own stuff. And so all that pressure that the drivers used to feel from the Italian press, that Ferrari used to, you know, put through the back door to a couple of favored journalists to sort of put pressure on one of his drivers, none of that will happen anymore, because, and it used to happen even after Enzo's passing, and that won't happen because Lewis is a media icon in his own right. So that's out of the way. I think, you know, you've got people, a lot of good engineers, international engineers. English is the spoken language, so that's not an issue. You don't have the sort of the stuff that John Surtees had to put up with Dragoni undermining his position because he was a mate of Ludovico Scarfiotti. That's not there because he's got Freddie Vasseur there. What is there? What challenges are there apart from the normal racing challenges? It's a very healthy environment for him right now. Porsche Eddie, Bottas beat Zhou, but they didn't have the fastest car. Yeah, right. I mean, so Bottas will think, well, at least I beat him. And Zhou will think, well, you know, guy's a Grand Prix winner. I wasn't that far away. Out-qualified him a few times. So Roberto Antonelli says, that's Lewis in his Bond villain era. Let's look at the picture again. Pretty cool, actually, isn't it? There it is. Yeah, I suppose he is a Bond villain there, isn't he? But everything's perfect. Look at the white, correct amount of white shirt showing, the ring, everything. You know, he looks absolutely perfect there. I wonder if he'll keep that look for the entire season. That's a good question, isn't it? Or whether he'll be Lewis with the baggy joggers and whatever coming into the. I don't think he will. I think he'll be a lot more upmarket, probably, if that's the right word, at Ferrari. Because Lewis loves all that stuff, doesn't he? And the tie's perfect. Let's look at the tie. I think it was perfect, wasn't it? What sort of collar's he gone for? No, the ties. See, that's a new thing, isn't it? With the new, this has happened in about the last 3 or 4 years. Small collar tie. Look at the gap between the knot and the button. That gap should not be there. No way. And yet Lewis has done it. And I think it's a fashion statement, actually. I suspect it is. Maybe some footballers done that and everybody else has copied. But I'm surprised Lewis has done that. Who wouldn't have done that? Oh, well, Jackie Stewart wouldn't do that. Wouldn't have done it in his day even, nor would Graham Hill. You'd get the tyre right up to the top. Not easy to do, and it stays there perfectly. But those modern shirts and the tyres don't lend themselves for that, or they're designed to be like that. I don't know, one of the two. Strange, isn't it? Somebody out there probably knows the answer. Bain, in World Rally Championship, which title is more prestigious, drivers or constructors, teams, actually? For me, the drivers, absolutely, 100%. It's not to say I'm not interested in the teams. And I love the fact that there aren't many teams in World Rally Championship. There's basically Hyundai and Toyota and Ford with M Sport through Malcolm Wilson. But everyone will say, a lot of manufacturer support. But I think that's actually better than, say, the Endurance Championship, which has got 12 manufacturers or something, where it's ridiculous how many there are. This one, you can really focus on the drivers. That's why I like it. And each team runs, Toyota, I think, are running 5 cars this year. Hyundai are running 3. They'll probably run a 4th in some rallies. That's all you need. And they're all in the same cars, which is, again, all you need based on our previous comments about beating your teammates. So, yeah, for me, it's always the drivers. And it is in Formula One too. Absolutely. 100%. Rao, do you know why Johnny Williams never became team principal considering his success with iSport? Well, that's a good question. And there are actually, the main reasons behind that are all quite personal to the family. And it would be, sadly, it sounds very pompous, but it's actually inappropriate for me to talk about those. But what I would say is I think you're right. I think he would have been a very good team principal at Williams, because Johnny wouldn't have gone in a dictatorial, autocratic way as I am the team principal. It would have been, Frank, my father, is impossible to replace, and I'm bringing in some really good people to manage this, to manage that, and I'm going to be a sort of figurehead and try to make sure that this all works to the essence of the way my father ran this team. And I think it would have been a very successful operation. I think he would have run, as you say, you would have had, Gavin Jones and Richard Selwyn in there and Paul Jackson. You would have had all those good guys from iSport. And they would have brought in good engineers as well. And you would have had very good operation. It would have been much more successful than it was, given what happened. But the reasons that it turned out to be his younger sister that did that, as I say, I know the reasons and I know what happened behind the scenes, but I don't want to talk about those, really. So Dillstar22, hi Peter, love your videos. It's always a great insight listening to you. Who do you think will be the most improved driver this season? Well, I hope it's Jack Doohan, because I fear for him having Colapinto there in the wings at Alpine as the reserve driver. But with Flavio shouting at him all the time, it's not going to be easy. But I hope does he need to improve a lot? Well, he obviously does, because he's only had one race under his belt. So, that's just total lack of experience, isn't it? Improved driver this season, it'll be interesting. It could be Oscar Piastri, because, as I've said in the past, Oscar's got this ability to become a Lewis, a Max, or a Charles. He does have the feel for getting a car in early to a corner. But I think he went away from that sort of after about a third of the 2024 season, because it was just beating Lando and looking at Lando's telemetry and out-qualifying him and out-racing him became more of a thing. And so he went away from sort of his own bubble of operation, the one I've been talking about earlier with Lewis, where Lewis is so self-critical and just gets better and better all the time until they put George in the car and gave him a bad car. Oh, hello, Dexter. How are you? Look, great. He's just coming in. Oh, yes, let's show a bit of Dexter, shall we? There's Dexter. There he is. He wants to be with PW. Good. Helping me with the live stream. Thanks, Dex. But I think, you know, Oscar he might have spent the winter thinking, sorry, it's got a bit tangled with the camera. He might spend the winter thinking, no, I need to get back. I need to start being Oscar, you know, who can get into corners earlier than Lando and does drive differently from Lando, not just trying to brake as late as possible or later than Lando. So I think we might see big improvements from Oscar. We may not, but we might. Let me think about some of the others. George, in that position he's in a really strong position to become a very polished team leader at Mercedes, and he will therefore, I think, he will smooth over a couple of his rough edges, and I think you'll see George getting better and better. He's very, very good, George. Charles, I think, will benefit a bit from Lewis, and Lewis's, you know, things Lewis does, his touch, his feel. Lewis might benefit a little bit from Charles. I think Lewis actually will probably improve, as I've been saying earlier, from where he finished 2024. I think you'll see a better Lewis in 25. So I think he'll have quite a big improvement graph line. I think Lando will be about the same, and he'll do that lovely coming out of the brakes and throttle when he's really on the limit. Just let the car settle. He'll do more of that, but that'll be basically Lando, I think. Max, yeah, Max always will improve because he's that sort of guy. It's one of the reasons he's so good. He's very, very self-critical as well, like Lewis and Charles. So Max, where will Max improve? He'll be looking, obviously, for a car that has a more consistent front end and that he can do more with going into the corner. And so he'll be thinking more of, I just hope the car is going to be like that. And I suppose he'll be thinking, well, if it's not, what am I going to do? How did I handle it last year? Could I have done a little bit better? And he'll probably say, well, whenever it was wet or it sort of neutralized all the dramas in the car, I always did pretty well, so I'm not going to do that much. So you could argue maybe he's not going to improve that much, but he is very good in keeping the car in one piece on the first lap and getting through the traffic if he needs to in a nice way, clean way. Yuki Tsunoda would be an interesting one, wouldn't he? He's probably really annoyed that he hasn't got the Red Bull drive, and his driving may go the other way as a result. I don't know, possibly. Depends how well he's managed. I think Pierre Gasly, I think you're going to see Pierre Gasly getting a lot better. Not a lot, you're going to see him getting better. Now that his team, I call it his team. To some extent, it's his team, I think now. With all that Mercedes thing and good engineers and the way they're running the car, a lot of it is down to Pierre and the team he's got behind him, management team. And I think he'll be very, very confident now, and very relaxed, and I think he'll get better and better. So I think Gasly could be one of the big surprises in terms of improvement and the results he's getting this year. Polish Eddie, Roberto, not villain, but more towards Victor Timothy. He wore that kind of thing to the Met Gala and wouldn't stop talking about how it's all about the first farmer in England. Okay, well, I don't know much about all that. It's all above my head. BNNT, any book recommendations for the new year? Trying to enjoy the quiet before the 24 race season starts for many. Yeah. Well, I'd go back. I mean, I'd certainly recommend that Di Tommaso book because it's not just about Alessandro Di Tommaso and the cars. It's about Modena in the 1950s, 60s and 70s, you know, and all of us love that time in Italy. I'm sure we do. And it's a very romantic time in some ways. And it's very cool that Di Tommaso never lived in a villa or an apartment. He just lived in a hotel in Modena throughout his career, the Canal Grande, where Carlos Reutemann always used to stay when he was in Modena. That's cool, isn't it? And who was it? Elaine Stritch, I think, the American actress, also used to live at the Savoy Hotel in London, I think, from memory. This whole business of living in a hotel, doesn't happen very often, does it? But Di Tommaso did. Very good. So I'd recommend the Di Tommaso book. What else? Jim Clark at the Wheel always needs to be reread. I'll tell you what I was reading also this Christmas, which I found almost impossible to put down, was the 2-volume Bernard Caillet autobiography. Wonderful photographs, beautifully written, incredible story by Bernard, the great photographer, journalist, very quick racing driver in his own right in his early days, who at the age of 17 joined, was it the Second Armored Corps, US Second Armored Corps, as part of the French resistance and was fighting in Normandy. I never knew that about Bernard. It's terrible, isn't it, when you discover all these things that you should have known when these dear people were with us. And Bernard was a very good friend. He was incredibly supportive of me in my early journalistic days and gave me lots of additional work, and used to invite me over to his villa and to his chalet in Villa in the winter for skiing. And we used to do a lot. I couldn't believe how supportive he was, actually. He was much more than I deserved. Anyway, he wrote this beautiful two-volume biography. So anybody that loves motor racing, I would highly recommend Bernard Caillet's autobiography. Just a wonderful thing. So yeah, thanks for that question. Reindeer Crows said the Pantera is so cool. Well, it is. The Pantera was a very cool car, as was the Mangusta, I think. And yeah, all of that. Lenin B, good day, Peter. Saw a clip of Nigel Mansell getting back into one of his Williams F1 cars years later. He was taken aback when realizing how exposed the drivers were in the cockpit back then, especially, especially compared to the cars with halo and other safety regulations of the days. What is your view on the trade-off between safety and sheer performance? Halo blocking view, safety measures, increasing weight of car. Well, yeah, we've gone down this road before, and as much as I'd love to say they're all wimps, and I wish we didn't have halos or high cockpit sides or the weight, I can't bring myself to say any of that, because I saw too much death and injury and destruction in my early years in Formula One. And if the penalty for not having fatalities, hopefully touch wood, is heavier cars with less visible drivers and halos, then I'm quite happy that we have that penalty. There's nothing worse. It's difficult to describe the feeling of talking to a driver before a race, maybe in the Goodyear motorhome, maybe by the pool at the hotel in the morning, and then learning halfway through the race that he's had a fatal accident. I mean, that is, and I experienced that a lot in the 70s, and I don't want to have to experience that anymore. I mean, the one that I still think about almost on a daily basis is Tom Price. Yeah, I knew Tom very well from Formula 3. Lovely, quietly spoken guy, funny guy, amazingly quick, fabulous car control. And yeah, I was literally, I was one minute I was chatting to him by the pool at the Kyle Army Ranch, he and Nella, his wife. The next minute I was wandering back from my position where I've been doing a lap chart in the race down at the exit of the Learcop hairpin, walking back to the pits and bumping into Alan Henry, and Alan saying, "Have you heard about Tom?" And the minute somebody says, "Have you heard about," and then the name of a driver, you know exactly what they're going to say next. And it's just the most draining feeling. It's the most horrendous thing. And that night we flew out. Nella was in the seat in front of me in the South African Airways 747. Tom was in the hole below. And it was the most miserable night of my life. Well, that and 75 when we lost Mark Donoghue as well in the Austrian Grand Prix, flying back that night. So yeah, it's all worth it. Whatever they want to do, if they want to make it safer, do it, is my view. And Nigel was right to talk about the low cockpit sides. And that to me was inexcusable, because 78, the writing was on the wall after Ronnie Peterson's accident at the Monza, at the Italian Grand Prix, the start line accident, when there was a multi-car shunt, and Vittorio Brambilla, another driver I knew very well, and his two mechanics, knew them well, good friends in the Beta Tools March, was hit on the head by a flying wheel and was unconscious and in a coma, very dangerously ill for quite a long time. And I remember at the time, well, I did a lot of research after that and wrote several articles in Autocar magazine about how we had to have much better cockpit protection for the drivers, and this is inexcusable, because we'd lost Mike Spence as well at Indy in 68. Same thing, front wheel just came back, hit him in the head. And it took Ayrton's accident in 94 for any changes to be made, which is, terrible, really. I mean, Jackie Stewart would say it far better than I. The number of times he would bash his head against a brick wall trying to get people to listen to what is logic. in terms of saving people's lives. And you'd get all these sort of, you know, big chest thumping macho men in Formula One calling him a wimp. Well, you know, sadly, those guys are no more. I think most of them have gone off the planet Earth, and now we can have sanity again. And, you know, at the time, I did a big thing about we should have a forward brace roll bar over the drivers after Vittorio's accident in '78. And nobody wanted to go down that path of importance, nobody of importance, because of the risk of being trapped underneath the car if there was a fire. But it's a bit like seatbelts, you know, it's the same argument. Oh, you don't want to be wearing seatbelts because what if there's a fire? You can't get out, you know. But the logic was, well, at least you might be conscious and have a chance to get out. If you don't have seatbelts, you might be thrown out, and that's the end anyway. And it was the same with that business of the fire. You know, fire protection was going to get better, and it did. And it was getting better almost on a yearly basis in terms of fuel tank design and chassis design and all the rest of it. Putting the fuel tank behind the driver was a major step forward. But even then, they didn't think forward brace roll bars or protection for the drivers on the side was important until Ayrton's accident in '94. So I'm all for it. I just wish Formula One, I think they are. I think, in all credit to Formula One today, I think they are, I seem to have lost a bit of exposure now. Sorry about that. It's coming back now, I think. They are keeping a pace with development in general, and safety in the cars is now much better than it was. And the rate at which we're making changes. And yeah, of course, it's a weight penalty. Not much more you can do about that, really. I think, wait, let me just go back. I'm going to try and do something quite clever now. Let me just have a look. Exposure is going to come down. No, it's not very good, is it? What about contrast? Don't know, maybe a bit better. Trying to be smart here, but not really working. Yeah, so we got to live with the weight, haven't we? David Brown, I'm so looking forward to seeing number 44 on a Ferrari. Will it fit? I suppose it will. Yeah. Ferrari will find a way of making it work. Yeah, it'll look pretty good, won't it? Scroopy Noopers, Sir Peter, do you think the £1 billion offer for Max by Aston Martin is legit? That seems obscene. I don't know. I think from the point of view of Lawrence Stroll, he's done a lot of reshuffling, hasn't he? He's moved Tom McCullough out of the team. I find that a very odd thing. I'm assuming that's an Adrian thing, and I don't know why. For me, Tom McCullough is one of the great engineers in the Formula One pit lane. I put him up there with, you know, Pat Simmons, of that ilk, you know, in terms of running a car in the pit lane, having racing in his blood and understanding what is needed, not being a great diplomat or politician maybe, but I think he's a very, very good practical performance engineer. And I find it very odd that he's now been moved sideways. And he's now working with Andy Green, actually, where they'll probably do a lot of good stuff at Aston Martin away from the Formula One team. But I'm assuming it's an Adrian thing, which is odd. So he's got Adrian, he's got Andy Cowell now running the whole thing as team principal. Very good man, Andy, and he'll be good at that. Do they need Max Verstappen? I mean, his problem is, what does he do after Fernando? Bearing in mind, he still wants Lance to be in the other car and looking good and having every chance to win. I'm sure he'd love to have Max Verstappen. And I'm sure if he quantifies it in terms of the value to the Aston Martin brand and all the rest of it, I suppose over a 5-year period, you could come to 1 billion, I would guess. So it's probably real. Whether it'll happen is another matter, of course. But I think Max will be, obviously, like everybody in the pit lane, will be interested in Adrian's performance at Aston Martin and how Adrian gets on there. It looks to me, the number of people that do leave that team, that it's a very, very difficult team to work for, a bit like the FIA, really, probably. And yeah, I mean, Graham Loudon is team principal of Cadillac now with their Ferrari engines. That's probably quite a good little operation to get into for some of these guys who find that working for the Strolls is too difficult. Not really answering the question. 1 billion is what I think you could afford to pay Adrian Newey if you were a Ferrari or a Mercedes, not necessarily a McLaren. Let's say Ferrari or a Mercedes, you could amortize that over a multi-year period and say Adrian's worth it. Whether a driver like Max is worth the same as a driver like an engineer like Adrian is another matter, I think. And I personally don't think it is. And I think that, we've seen McLaren winning at the moment without Adrian Newey. So there's a good example. And I think Ferrari can probably go very well this year. And they don't have Adrian Newey. They decided not to go for the €1 billion Adrian Newey route. And yet Aston Martin have done it. Do they also need now to make it work? Do they need Max Verstappen? I'm not sure they do. Scroopy Noopers. Peter, given how the cars have converged in the last year or so, do you think we should look at locking in regulations for a year or so longer to get good close racing? Seems a pity that we are on the, well, I don't know what the last bit was. It's not the next message anyway, but you make a good point, which is we've had these regulations now since 2022 and it's now 2025. And as you say, the teams are converging because there's a limit to what you can do if you're running a decent operation. And we've got McLaren, Red Bull, Mercedes, Ferrari, pretty closely matched. You probably find Alpine aren't going to be too far away, maybe one of the other teams as well. So, and that's all because we've had these regulations for quite a long time. So it is an argument for keeping them. Well, this is is Formula One all about racing and the show, or is it about improving the breed? Is it about cutting edge technology? Or is it about both? And if it is about both, where is the compromise? That is basically the discussion that they're always going to have at any of these big FIA policy meetings. And I've always erred on the side of the show and things being close and competitive and not too expensive, because I've been around long enough to know that all this business about improving the breed and the technology cutting edge was just a thing that Bernie came up with in 1981, basically to stop anybody coming near Formula One and taking away the cake that he was creating for his boys, i.e. the team owners. And it's nonsense, isn't it? Because here we are improving the breed, and Cadillac have got a Ferrari engine, Aston Martin have got a Mercedes engine, and so it goes on. Alpine have got a Mercedes engine. Where's the technology? Okay, the chassis technology, I get it, the aero stuff, but in terms of we are prototype. Sorry, and we should add Haas and Dallara in there. In terms of this, prototype mini factories that all the teams are supposed to be with their own DNA, that went out the window a long time ago. So I think there is an argument for that, and if you look at the way we were settled with V8s and V10s, or V10s and then V8s, and then that was just stopped to go to hybrid engines, and how that changed things overnight, trebled the cost, and probably took away at least 50% of the reliability over the first 2 or 3 years of the formula, then why do you want to change something that's working so well? Well, because we have to go to electrification. That's the way it's going in the world in order to get more manufacturers into the sport. Well, do we want more manufacturers in the sport? Cadillac are coming in. It's a brand, but they're not actually coming in as a manufacturer, are they? They're not building their engine. Okay, they're going to build the car, but the rule book kind of builds the car for you. And here we are. It's nonsense to me. I would focus on making things as close and as competitive as possible. But then again, I think the team owners probably feel that the more Cadillacs, assuming it doesn't take away the slice of the cake for them, or they get compensated for the arrival of a new team, I think all the team owners think that if there are more blue chip companies on the grid, it'll put the value of their team up anyway. So that's got to be a good thing. So we've got to welcome all these. We should get Toyota in, and Hyundai, and all these other companies should be coming in. So, yeah. My answer is, wouldn't it be great if this formula was extending through the next 2 or 3 years? We'd probably find 6 or 7 teams be capable of winning Grand Prix by then. I think you're right, Scroopy. Casual fan. I don't know why Colapinto reminds me of Francois Seber. Oh. Okay. Yeah, curly. He's got curlyish hair, and yeah. I don't know. I mean, Francois, I can only speak about Francois Sever at the moment. Very deep, husky French voice. Husky because he smoked a lot of Gauloises and Gitane. Diamond blue eyes. I say diamond because they just sort of sparkled. Just incredibly good looking guy. Dead cool with his clothing, what he used to wear, coats in the winter, the overcoats he had, the check overcoats, the shoes, the jeans, just mega. And in the summer, he was this Adonis. And very quick, fast racing driver. He loved motor racing. You know, what can you say? Somebody who can, what is it, a Formula 2 Techno, I think, up the Ollonvilla hill climb, concrete walls, trees everywhere, and set a new all-time record, which I think still stands today. I'm probably doing, might be doing, Martini, a misservice. Maybe it was a disservice. Maybe it was a Martini Formula 2 car. Anyway, Francois, very quick, lovely guy. And got into the corners quite early. I mean, at least as early as Oscar Piastri does today. So in that sense, a much more refined driver than Colapinto, who's definitely wide, sort of Carlos Sainz-y, Liam Lawson-y. You know, yeah, I've crashed and hit the wall in the wet. What do you expect? I'm on the limit sort of thing. Not much finesse there in that sense, but very, very good in other areas. Very nice touch. Very good racing brain, but he drives on the back end of the car. So, you know, he hasn't got the same finesse as a Francois Sever, in my opinion, who was never a back end driver. Never. Not in the way Clay Regazzoni was, for example. And I think that's why Jackie Stewart liked Francois so much, because he drove similarly to Jackie. Max Flashart, probably better that way. Yeah, probably, yeah. Quite sure what that means, Max, but a good name anyway. Scroopy Noopers again. Cusp of changing regulations. Okay, right. That was the end of your last one. When teams have converged to be the closest. 26 will probably mean one team running away with it again. Yeah, well, I think you're right. You know, new regulations, somebody will get the power unit absolutely right. And then it'll all come down to who's got the best EV side of the power unit. Talk about boring anyway. Hope it doesn't happen. But there's all these people doing this balancing act between the show and technology. And I'm not sure the people that make the decisions actually are the right people anyway to be making those decisions, but that's just me. Hanny Fam, hey Peter, I have a little video idea. Since it's the 75th anniversary of Formula One, why don't you make a list of the 75 greatest drivers in history, as NASCAR and NBA basketball have done? Yeah, I could do that. Could do. Well, what about all the drivers before 1950? What do we think about those? Are we not going to have, you know, the Boyos? Are we not going to have Tazio Nuvolari or Caracciola or Vazzi? That's the trouble with this. You know, there's so many people make a big deal about that first Grand Prix in 1950. Not the French, who managed to give it to the British. You know, to me, it always breaks my heart a little when I think about all those people who are racing for just as much glory and just as competitively and in even more dangerous situations than anybody in the 50s. Yeah, Richard Seaman. In what context was Richard Seaman not a very cool Formula One driver who very sadly had that accident in 39, or Achille Vazzi, or Bernd Rosemeyer? Yeah. In doing that, how would you, if I came up with those 75 names, how would I justify not having Bernd Rosemeyer in there? This guy gets on the SS Bremen with the Mercedes and his full auto union team, and they go across the Atlantic to New York, and he goes and wins the Vanderbilt Trophy race at Long Island and becomes an American star in America anyway. On what basis should he not be in the top 75? So that's the problem with those things. Anyway, but thanks for the idea. We'll think about it. We're thinking about it at the moment. CNC Tematic. Hi, Peter. Charles Leclerc to win his maiden World Championship 25. Thoughts? Yeah, could well do. Could well do. I doubt Ferrari going to be far away from McLaren now. I just can't imagine that they won't have improved the car a little bit over the winter And that's all they needed to do, just make it a little bit more consistent. Weren't very good in Abu Dhabi, were they? But anyway, let's hope that well, I hope that happens. For their sake, I hope it happens. And Charles certainly deserves a world championship. That is absolutely for sure. And Lewis will be a part of that as well. And yeah, wouldn't it be good? JP Eagles and Cats. Hello, Sir Windsor. The glasses look good on you. I hope you're doing well. Thank you very much. Yeah, these are just these computer blue screen glasses things, just to make it a bit easier on your eyes when you're staring at a screen all day. Quite like them actually. Easy peasy, I think they are. So yeah, thank you very much, Sir Windsor. Yeah. Often, what did we get? Was it Sir Martin Brundle now? I think it is, or Martin Brundle OB. Congratulations to him, I think. But whenever those New Year's Honour things come out, I think, oh wow, they got one. Oh, he got one. I always pacify myself by thinking, well, the greatest guy I ever knew, my dad, never got any honours. So there you go. It doesn't change anything the way I feel about my dad. Hristo Patsev. Hi, Peter. Do you think Mick Schumacher is a short corner driver? Thank you. No, I don't. I don't actually. I don't think he's a long corner driver either. I think he's sort of down the middle, fairly classically traditional. Certainly not short corner driver the way his father is and was. And I think maybe that's been one of his limitations. You know, I'm surprised that he didn't work more on that. But I never saw him as a short corner driver in the way that, say, Fred Vesti is, for example. And so, yeah, I think he's just down the middle, really. A bit like Felipe Massa would be a good example. Massa he was always down the middle for me as well, in that sense. Not Carlos Sainz, but then equally, and he was a bit sort of Daniel Ricciardo in that sense. Yeah. So, well, I think let me clarify that a bit more. I think what it means is that when there are corners that lend themselves to being shortened, if you like, turn one, Shanghai, I guess, is a good example. Then, you know, I think Mick's up there with the best of them. But when you have to create a short corner in a situation where it's much less obvious of how to do it, then I don't think he did that. And that's where the Maxes and the Lewises, and you often hear me saying in these videos, there aren't many corners where Max can be Max. I've said that a few times, haven't I? And I said that about Lewis and Charles too. And I said that about Qatar, that Qatar circuit. It's a circuit that's very difficult for somebody like Max or Lewis actually to find a corner where they're going to do something differently to Lando Norris. And I think on those places, Mick's very good. But I think in terms of what his father used to do, and his father used to create these short corners, I don't think Mick ever did that. Zishan Asfar, your thoughts on Mika Häkkinen's career? Even though he won 2 world championships with McLaren, do you think he could have been more dominant? No, I think that was about the right thing for Mika. You know, that shunt he had in Adelaide definitely was a big one, and it definitely affected things. You know, his hearing was a bit affected, and I think the reason he stopped pretty smartly after winning quite a lot at McLaren was because of, you know, well, I've done this, I've done enough, I'm out of here. Bit like Nico Rosberg, but I think it was about the right thing. Yeah, he's good enough to win 2 world championships. I mean, that's a big thing, isn't it? To win 2 world championships back to back. And the way he adapted to the fiddle brake on the McLaren was brilliant. How he was able to use that within a couple of laps. He was just fabulous in terms of killing the understeer and just getting the back end out, the Steve Nichols extra brake pedal, which Darren Heath uncovered in the car. And the way he worked with Bridgestone. He was fabulous with Bridgestone as well, and got the best from the Bridgestones in 98 and 99. So I think he was good. And, you know, and he dovetailed beautifully with Ron Dennis too. Didn't say too much. Ron was at his peak in terms of knowing what it took to put together the right team, and everybody was on the same wavelength. It was just a great thing. Just everything happened perfectly, and then he stopped. It's good. Max Flashut says Doohan has an opportunity to impress. Well, he certainly does. He does. I just think there's a bit of pressure on him now that shouldn't be there because of this whole Colapinto fanfare and Flavio's history of signing a driver and then dumping him. It would, you know, if I was Mick, I'd been a bit nervous about Jack. Well, let's not talk about Mick because he's just a good bloke, or a good bloke. If I was Jack, I would be obviously putting the whole thing out of my mind. I'd be looking forward to the Australian Grand Prix and driving well, but I would be, you know, Flavio's a very difficult guy to drive for. Very difficult. If he's got a bee in his bonnet that he wants to get Colapinto in that car as soon as possible, if you're Jack Doohan, how do you handle that? Do you stretch the car to the absolute limit all the time? Or do you leave a bit of margin to make sure you don't hit anything and hope that you're going to be right there with Pierre, maybe ahead of him or not? I mean, it's a difficult thing. It's difficult. I hope he goes really well. I'm a big fan, as everybody knows. I've known Jack since he was in Formula 4 in the UK, and I really hope he has a great year. I hope his year at Alpine is as good as Jackie Stewart's year at BRM in 1965, his first season in Formula 1. Scroopy Noobers, Jack Doohan looks so much like his old man Mick, 5 MotoGP champion. Mick was more mechanical machine than man by the end of his career, though. So many replacement parts after many crashes. Yeah, he was fabulous, wasn't he, Mick? All those shunts. Was it Assen or something? He had that mega one. I'd say mega, huge one. But yeah, he was just brilliant. Mick Doohan always reminded me a little bit of Steve Podborski, the Canadian downhiller. I think they were winning at the same time, actually. You know, Steve kind of found this sweet spot and just started winning everything when nobody had even heard of him. And he was just upstage Ken Reed. He was just amazing, as was Mick for that golden period. How do I know all that? Because I actually met Steve through Bernard Caillet, that chalet I was talking about earlier. Steve Podborski, Ken Reed came over for lunch and became a massive fan overnight. And then I don't think Steve had won anything then. And then he won like 4 downhills that year. I thought, wow, this is amazing. I love downhill skiing. To me, it's very near Formula 1. So that was that. And that day, just to go back to Bernard Caillet now, not only was Steve Podborski and Ken Reed there, Bernard knew them. How he knew them, I don't know. But he did. He knew everybody. But guess who else was there for lunch? Who just turned up for lunch? Olivier Gendebien, former Le Mans winner, Ferrari factory Formula 1 driver, Belgian, very good friend of Bernard. There we were all having lunch. Ken Reed, Steve Podborski, Olivier Gendebien, Bernard Caillet, Joan Caillet, and Peter Windsor. I couldn't believe it. Oh, those were the days. That was at Villars, Olain Villars. Lovely chalet Bernard had, and his 2 black Labradors called Shadow, he used to call it Shadow, and Blue Boy. And all the snow would pile up outside the chalet because it was a skiing, it was winter, obviously. And Bernard would love taking the 2 dogs up with him to the balcony above, and then they'd just jump off the balcony into this pile of snow. They would sink, and then sort of 2 minutes later, these 2 black labs would come up out of the powder snow. Dexter, what do you think about that? He's fast asleep. DBY, thoughts on the qualifying pace of Lewis if he's lost the edge, or is it this generation of cars just doesn't suit his style? No, I don't think it's that. I think it's more that it was George absolutely on the edge in a quite difficult car. And I think because of that, as I said earlier, I think Lewis, for the first time in his career, was a bit lost because he couldn't afford to be too self-critical because he kept having all this telemetry in front of him from George Russell saying what George was doing and why wasn't he Lewis doing it. So he couldn't sort of work on his own stuff, and it was all under pressure, and it was difficult time. It was as I predicted. As soon as Abu Dhabi 21 was over, it was predictable that it was going to be a very difficult time for Lewis Hamilton, and it was in every dimension. And he was still coming over out of Abu Dhabi 21 as well. And it's nothing to do with the cars. Obviously, it was a difficult car. And learning how to drive a car that wasn't as good as anything he'd ever driven before in Formula 1 with a super quick teammate in the other car who was prepared to put it right out there on the limit when Lewis wasn't, was enough to make a lot of people think Lewis has lost his qualifying pace. I don't think he has, and I think it'll come back. I think it will. I think it's back already, probably. And I think he'll be in a completely different world at Ferrari. And Charles will be a much better teammate for him than was George Russell, in terms of Lewis becoming his own man again and delving deep within himself to be self-critical and improving in a logical, organic way in a new environment, rather than under pressure because a young punk teammate is blowing you away. So Ice11 just wants us all to be clear about this. He says, Sir Lewis Hamilton is a Ferrari driver, in capital letters. Amazing, isn't it? Thanks for that, Ice11. iRacing Aussie. G'day, mate. Dear Peter, happy health to you and the family in 25. Thank you very much indeed. Wonderful. How much did Lewis's photo at Maranello invoke the memories and excitement of Nigel joining Ferrari late in '88? Yeah, they were fun times, that Ferrari time with Nigel. And it was, because the Italians, the nice thing about that, I mean, this isn't me sounding in any way bitter, but bear in mind, Nigel's only exposure really to the press was through the British press. And he'd always had a hard time from the British press, from the minute he joined Lotus, or even before he joined Lotus, to the Williams days, because Nelson was always, better with the press. And Nigel was never liked by the sort of real hardcore Formula One British journalists. He was not their guy. And yet he would do these odd interviews with Italian TV and Italian journalists like Roberto Boccafoli or others, French journalists as well, and everything would be fine. And so, of course, he went to Ferrari, and the Italian press had no conception of any of that ill feeling that existed between Nigel and the British press. For them, he was just this British driver with a moustache, and he wore the cloth check cap, and he got in the car, and he started doing these incredible feats in the car that blew their minds. And so what could they do but love him and call him El Lion, the lion, El Lion, and Il Lion. And it was just a brilliant time, because none of that sort of baggage came with him that had been invented by all the British press. That's why it was such a great time. For me, anyway, I really enjoyed it. And watching, I mean, it was the John Barnard car. So it was a slightly different Ferrari, obviously, to the Enzo Ferrari era or the Ferrari we have today, in that John Barnard was very sort of McLaren, Ron Dennis-esque in the way he operated as well. And everything was immaculate. And there was the GTO thing in the UK, and it was all slightly different. So there was all that. But Nigel was, he was, as we all know, quite capable of picking a car up by the scruff of the neck and doing whatever he needed to. And I think it was passing Berger on the outside in Mexico on that last corner that really endeared Nigel to the Italian fans forevermore. That was just so outrageous. It was just brilliant. That was in 90, wasn't it? So, yeah, it was a great time. I mean, I've got great memories of all those Ferrari press conferences over the winter. And we'd all go over there, all the British press, and Enzo Ferrari would sit at this long table with lots of people, Gozzi and others either side of him. And we'd all have headsets on, and Enzo would start his speech. And then we'd go outside, and there would be Clay and Nicky, for example, and they'd be in jacket and ties and little sleeveless pullover underneath. And there would be the new Ferrari outside the factory. And then we'd all go and have lunch at the Cavallino. It was pretty good, I tell you, great times. There was no choice. It was just sit down and you have this lovely side salad, mozzarella, tomato. No, it wasn't mozzarella. It was just tomato, lettuce, the way the Italians just do those lovely salads. And then you'd sit down and just the pasta would arrive. Absolutely gorgeous, some macaroni and whatever. And then some meat and vegetables. And then there would be coffee and I think possibly a small bit of sorbet or something like that. Coffee. And there would be Enzo Ferrari at the next table, and Nicky would be there, and Clay would be here, and You know, you talk to Mara Fogieri for half an hour and, you know, why is life so difficult? Different now. I was going to say difficult. Why is life so different now? Those things just don't happen anymore, do they? I think I was very lucky. That's the understatement of the year. Right. So, Wally 90. Verstappen versus Sainz qualifying head-to-head was 12:11. There you go. That's, you know, that's probably a lot of the reason Carlos Sainz is not at Red Bull right now. 12:11. I hadn't actually counted it up. In my mind, it was always never, you know, it was always quite good for Carlos Sainz. You know, it wasn't blown away at all. 12:11 against Max Verstappen. That's pretty impressive, isn't it? In the Toro Rosso. No wonder Max wants young Isaac Hadjar. No, it's not Isaac Hadjar, is it? Oh, Liam Lawson. Actually, Liam Lawson is very quick too. You know, I suspect Liam will out-qualify Max a couple of times this year. Genuinely out-qualify him. Hey, YZ. Yes. Hey. Yeah, good. Hey. Flip angle. Don't styles make fights? Comparing pace isn't possible. Max is in a car that matches how he drives. Lewis wasn't. Lando out-qualified Oscar at McLaren. We can't know if he'd do that in a Ferrari. Yeah, I'm not quite sure I see it that way. I mean, for me, style is an overused word. I mean, it's a useful word a lot of the time, but the beauty of the ability of a Max or a Lewis or a Charles is the ability to live with the variables and still make the car work, whatever car they're driving. And so it's not a question of style. It's a question of, because they drive that way, they are more adaptable than other drivers who kind of get locked into one way of driving. And that showed up when you compared Lewis with Nico, for example. So Max is in a car that matches how he drives. Lewis wasn't. I don't know. How do you know that? How do you know that? How do you know that Max wasn't doing more to adapt to the way that Red Bull needed to be driven on the limit than Lewis was? How can any of us know that? I don't even know if Max would know that, would he? I mean, that's... If you know that flip angle, I'd be interested to know how you know that. I don't believe the engineers would know that. I don't think the drivers would either. As far as Lewis goes, he was obviously trying to do the best lap he could at any given moment of 2024. He was obviously trying to drive at his best. But at the same time, the first time in his career, he was seeing a lot of telemetry from the other car, which showed what that driver was doing that he wasn't. And that car was going quicker. That's never happened to him before on a regular basis. And the car was a difficult car to drive. And Lewis didn't know how to get out of that box because the car had its limitations. If he did this, the tires went off. If he did that, the ride height had to be raised and the traction went away, or whatever it was. And so that was the first time he's in that situation, and he had to make the best of it. Max is in a completely different situation where he's not looking at what the other guy's doing. He's just trying to get the best from the car all the time. And sometimes the car was good and sometimes it wasn't. Two different situations, in my opinion. Sheriff of Santa Monica, the best rookies of this new generation are Antonelli and Isaac. Okay, that's interesting. Wonder if we should hold you to that one. Yeah, it's an interesting observation. We don't talk much about Antonelli at the moment, but let's wait and see how he goes. He does look to be a bit of a short corner merchant to me. He does look pretty. He looks suspiciously good, I suppose is the right way to say it. You know, so Toto might well have chosen a good guy there. I'm sure he has, actually. I'm sure he's very, very good. But there are lots of other, you know, Isaac looks to be similarly good in that area, doesn't he, as well? But would you call Liam Lawson a rookie? I don't know. If you consider Liam Lawson a rookie, I would say he's going to be very, very good as well. Max Flashart says the F40 was Hamilton's choice for the shoot. Oh, well, good. Good on him. I don't think it's the most beautiful of Ferraris. That's my point. I just think it's a bit of a shame that well, you know, I suppose it's brutal and it's beautiful in its brutality. I guess you could say that. And I certainly would not say no to being driven around the Nordschleife by Lewis in an F40, assuming the tyres would last, which I don't think they would. But it wouldn't be my choice of car. And I speak as somebody, I'm going to annoy everybody now, who's been driven around the Nordschleife by Mark Donoghue in a 911. That was my choice of car and driver. And that was one of my great moments, really. Well, it's one of the greatest moments of my life. Yeah, fair enough. Tyler, Peter, do you think it was intentional? I didn't know this. Do you think it was intentional, Lewis, to take photos with the F40 right around when we found out Lando's F40 was involved in a crash? I didn't know it had. Probably, knowing Lewis. Easy car to drive. Oh, sorry, easy car to drive. What are you doing, Lando? I was speaking of that. I thought it was, I don't know how many people saw this. It was, I don't know if it's still out there or not, but Elfyn Evans is a very cool guy. He's a Welsh farmer, basically. He's a very, very fast rally driver, son of Gwyndaf Evans, and lovely guy. Stays out of the limelight, doesn't want to have people around him, you know, telling him how wonderful he is. He's just a great guy. And for some reason, he found himself recently driving the new Ferrari, what's it, the pure blood thing. It's for want of a better thing, it's the first Ferrari SUV. Can you believe it? You know, although I don't think Ferrari call it an SUV. I think they've taken the S out of it, which means all the sporting elements out. So there's a Ferrari. Anyway, this weird car, and apparently Elfyn Evans was driving it, and Ferrari were there, and you know, some Ferrari, and he said something like, "So, what is this car for?" They explain, you know, well, you know, it's a utility Ferrari. And he said, but I could have a farm and a Dacia Duster for this money. And I thought, wow, yes, right on, Elfyn Evans. Brilliant. You could. The money you'd spend on that thing, you could have a proper farm in Wales and a Dacia Duster. Why wouldn't you as well? So, yeah. As I say, to solve all arguments, you just put in a 1966 Ferrari Dino, wouldn't you? If you want a beautiful Ferrari in the background, that's what I would have done. Or the 330 P4. Sorry, yeah, you can have a 67 330 P4 as well. Obviously, that's what should have been there. That or the Dino. Mariska Dum. Hi Peter. What are the things we should be watching for during the pre-season testing in a month from now? Liveries. What drivers look like in the new overalls. I don't think you can be able to tell too much. The teams are so clever today, aren't they? If they're super quick, they're going to disguise it. If they're in trouble, they're going to tell everybody how wonderful the car is. And I suppose the only thing nobody can escape from is how much time they spend out of the car. So if you see a car only doing 3 laps for 2 days in a row, you'll know they've got some sort of problem. It's about the only thing you can do. There's so many variables in terms of weather, when they go out, tires, you know, all that stuff. And there's so much disguising going on. I don't think we can draw many conclusions at all from anything. It's not like the old days when, I remember when it was 79, back into 78, was it? Yeah, back into 78, maybe very early 79. Everybody was testing at Ricard and doing this, and then they all packed up and went home. Then Ligier went down there, went 3 seconds a lap quicker than everybody else around the short circuit of Ricard. And everybody thought, oh, well, you know, must be a good day, no wind, whatever. And they get to the Argentine Grand Prix, and the Ligiers just disappear into the distance. And that was the Gerard Ducarrouge Ligiers, Jacques Lafitte and Patrick Depailler, and just wonderful cars. And of course, they were super quick until the rivets started to loosen on the monocoques, which happened after about 4 races, and they couldn't work out what was going on. And then, of course, the skirts started to lift as a result, and they lost all their downforce. But for the first 2 or 3 races, they were just amazing. Sarosh Soman, Peter saw a kart race in which Senna and Prost participated. Was amazed as to how Prost was fast, but with so little movement with his steering. So Jackie said that Senna was faster, Prost was better. Yeah. Well, Prost was unbelievably good. I mean, somebody sent me a message recently about this Netflix thing about Senna, and they said, so Prost was the only driver he raced against? Like, he never raced against anybody else. But in a way, I kind of get it, because there they were, back-to-back 88. And look how close Prost took it to Senna. He was good. He was really good, Prost. Very little steering movement. And the risk of people saying, oh, I heard this one before, Peter, I'll remind everyone of the time I invited Frank Williams. He loved to stay on the pit wall with his clipboard and stopwatches and make notes, copious notes of his cars. As well, why not? You know, that was Frank, wasn't it? But I said, Frank, come on, you've got to come out the back here at Zandvoort, and I've got to show you what's going on here. It's unbelievable. And so, so we walked out the back to Schlievling, the right-hander, very quick right-hander over the brow of the hill. And we were standing on the inside, a bit dodgy on the outside, as you can imagine. And I said, watch Prost, watch Prost. And he was in the Renault Turbo. And Prost just came through like that. And Frank sort of looked at me and said, yeah. I said, well, you know, he's just gone second quicker than anybody else. He said, well, he looked like he was on a warm-up lap. I said, well, that's exactly why I want you to watch him. Look at him. Look how good he is. And that was the point. You know, Prost was he was short corners. He was incredibly good with the steering and the throttle. And he was like that from day one. I mean, talk to John Watson about that. John couldn't believe how good Prost was the minute he drove that McLaren. And, you know, when he first came into Formula One. And I think Senna probably was confused by that, because Senna was definitely more steering movement and obviously a lot more throttle movement. And he was this guy that appeared to be on rails all the time, who was just so quick. But it was all to do with his feel for what the car needed at any given moment. And of course, a lot of it was all to do with the downforce and the tyres at the time and the way the cars had to be driven in the turbo car. But Prost, outstandingly good, deserved his 4 world championships. Sorry to use outstanding as an adverb there. It doesn't really work, does it? So, next one. Let's have a look. Okay. Sarosh Soman, Peter, why do you think Gasly struggled in RBR, please? Also hope that you enjoyed the test series in Australia and India. Yeah, love the test series. What a last test that was. I was particularly happy because it was, you know, it's a new look team. I think Pat Cummins has done a great job with the Australian team. And I think Sam Constas is you know, I've always been a bit negative about T20 and the impacts it has on Test cricket. But this was Test cricket suddenly coming back into public focus again. I mean, I don't know how many people they had at the Melbourne Test, but it was definitely over 300,000, wasn't it? And to have Sam Constas hitting those shots as an opening batsman, it's just amazing. And he went to my school as well. I couldn't believe that. Anyway, yeah, I really enjoyed that and felt sorry for India in a way, because they played well, but a bit sort of political, weren't they? All those team shuffles going on, bit of acrimony. But Steve Smith, just wonderful to watch at any given moment as well. And Australia's got a team now where if some of the class batsmen don't add up at the start, there's always good enough strength in the midfield to get the runs on the board as it used to be in the old Steve Waugh days. And that's why they're doing so well now, I think. Why did Gasly struggle in Red Bull? Did he? I think there wasn't a place for him. He was always pretty good. I don't think he struggled more than, in reality, any other driver. He just suddenly fell out of favour with Red Bull. And, well, I say Red Bull. I think, I think he could have stayed there, but he got the offer for Renault, and it was just a good moment to leave. French driver, French team. It was a good thing to do. You know, I keep saying I think Gasly's really quick, and I think you're going to see an even faster Gasly in 2025. And I think that's because, I think in that Red Bull environment, probably he was a bit sort of stagnating there, management-wise. And I think now he's much more able to be Pierre Gasly, and he's got much freer air to breathe. Obviously, Flavio rates him, which is good, and he's got good people around him. He's got the Merc engine. He's going to be good this year, for sure. Tyler Lewis is hosting the Met Gala this year. Yeah. Zishan Asfar. Peter, do you think Newey will call all the shots at Aston irrespective of their new restructure? Yes, I don't think he is calling the shots on a daily basis. I think if Adrian says to Andy Cowell, I don't want this mechanic on that car anymore, or I'm getting rid of this engineer, by the way, he's not delivering, I think we should hire this guy. I think Andy Cowell will just dot the I's, cross the T's, whatever you want, Adrian. So in that sense, yeah, they'll obviously discuss it if there's some issue about it, but Adrian's been around long enough not to want to make a change unless there's good reason to do so. As I say, I'd be fascinated to know why they've moved Tom McCullough, because, you know, that kind of goes against my feeling and understanding of how good Tom is. But it's not the first time that's happened. Maybe it wasn't Adrian. You know, another guy might be Fernando still, because if Fernando said to Andy Cowell, we got to do something. The car went backwards in the second half of 24. That's nothing to do with the engineering staff. That's to do with the way we run the car at race meetings. We've got to get a better guy to run the car in the pit lane, and we need to make changes. If Fernando said that, I think probably Andy Cowell would listen to that as well and would probably do it, because Fernando's a pretty important, strong guy. But even then, Andy would probably then ask Adrian Newey and say, what do you think about this, Adrian? So yeah, I think Adrian's in a very, as he always is, has been, and deservedly so, is in a very strong position there, definitely. Langrangi and Density, hello. Mr. Arrow, Happy New Year, Peter. I was hoping you might share some thoughts on any outcomes you're expecting this season that may be considered surprising en masse. What underappreciated battles and the like? Well, as I say, I think, you know, if you want to consider Gasly going well a surprise, I think that might happen. To me, the really interesting thing this season will be, can Red Bull get back to where they were with a car at least as good as a McLaren? That's an interesting question that I'm sure most people have their opinions about and would like to talk about. And it's an interesting thing to see and to know what is going to happen there. How good are Red Bull going to be this year? That's one. Two, I think, is Mercedes can't continue to have a bad car again, can they? And if they have a good car with George Russell there, I think George has got a good chance of winning a championship if they've got a good car. This guy is seriously quick. So those are two interesting points. Can Mercedes also get a decent car? And if so, how good is George Russell going to be? Then the third element is going to be Lando versus Oscar Piastri. Obviously, the McLaren is still going to be quick, but that's going to be the interesting battle for me there in that team, is going to be Lando versus Piastri. Ferrari will be a little bit along the lines of Mercedes and Red Bull. Can they get the car back to where it should be, or can they take the car to where it should be, not back? And if so, can Charles then win a championship? So they're all really four interesting, fascinating things. I think Gasly will be quick. And beyond that, yeah, what else do I think about that? I think that's the most interesting thing, really. You know, can Alpine continue to get better? And I think they will with the Mercedes engine. Yeah, and then it'll be the midfield, won't it, after that? Well, it's funny. Trishala says, Mr. Windsor, is there any chance George might win the Drivers' Championship this season? Well, that's interesting, because I've just been talking about that, Trishala. And I do think there is a chance, yeah. I think George is quite capable of it if the Mercedes is as good as a McLaren. And let's face it, that's not beyond the realms of possibility by any means, because there are enough people at Mercedes to be able to try to work out what's been going on there and why they're so slow this last year of these regs. And if that car's as good as a McLaren, George Russell could win a world championship, definitely. He's good enough to do it. Aiden Power 100. Hi, Peter. When is your autobiography coming out? Some great stories to be told. Oh, Aiden Power. You know, when I was, currently every day, basically, I'm sitting there going through all this stuff in storage, and I'm coming across all these files and letters, and long before email was invented, faxes, letters, articles, books, things that I don't know, I was looking through some letters I was writing at the beginning of 91 about a sponsorship package for Williams, £400,000 sponsorship package with an Italian company for Williams at the time, which never got on the car. And I completely forgotten all that. And I went over to Italy and tried to put him on the car and met up with Ricardo, I remember, on that trip, and good fun. Just so many things. You're absolutely right. I've got so much stuff. It's almost overwhelming, actually. And I've got so many. I mean, I was going through some old bank statements and stuff from the 80s, right? And I'm just about to throw them out. I think they're past the time when I need them. And out flutters a black and white photograph of Jochen Rindt, signed by Jochen, absolute original signature. Just flew out of these bank statements, just like that. I'm thinking, I'm not going to throw anything out. There's so much stuff here. And I'd forgotten I did a race in a Sunbeam Talbot Lotus at Brands. Everyone was in Sunbeam Talbot Lotuses. I started from the back of the grid. I was reading this thing. Windsor started from the back of the grid and finished third. I don't remember it at all, but obviously it did. Bad. I don't know. When I get to the new studio, I'll start looking at everything and showing everybody, showing all of you what's there, because there's so much stuff. I wouldn't even know how to begin an autobiography now. I'd be so afraid of finishing a chapter and thinking, oh no, I didn't mention that. I didn't do this, didn't mention that. It's more fun doing these live streams, I think. Blade Bowman. What if teams had to build up a third car for the backup driver to use in a sprint race series for all rookies every race weekend? Wouldn't that be brilliant? Well, yeah, absolutely. It's kind of my idea of having a B Division World Championship for all the young drivers running the Formula One cars from the last 2 or 3 seasons. Is never going to happen because people are incapable of organising such a brilliant thing. But I've made this point many times. We should have third cars there, definitely, for the sprint race. Well, my point is we should have a third car in case having 2 cars means that if Max stops on lap 1 of practice, that's out. Stops out in the circuit. But if he's got a spare car, he can run back and get in the spare car, and the fans get to see him running again. It's good for Formula One. And I don't believe it's going to be that difficult, that expensive to have spare cars, or would be. But because they're locked into this thing, you've got to have 2 cars only. That's the way it's going to stay, I guess. Scroopy Noopers says, he's talking to A. Aiden. He's being a bit too complimentary about that, I think, so I'll probably skip over this one. Peter seems to be our generation's more coherent version of Murray Walker. Well, don't compare with Murray. He's the icon, isn't he? Same deep knowledge, but able to do better analytical deep dives. I'm surprised he's not a regular part of the official Formula One cast. I think because I'm too outspoken and too opinionated, probably. Low FG. My thumbnail's straight out of Austin Powers, was it? Oh, yeah, I think it was, wasn't it? Yeah, I enjoyed that one. Max thinks that Lewis looks as if he's going to a funeral. Well, as I say, that's very modern, circa either 1938 or 1947, whichever way you want to do it. But yeah, very much so. That's how it was. Enzo Ferrari in that period in Modena, in those restaurants, that's how they were. It was all very, lots of violin cases. In fact, speaking of which, another thing, I suppose it can go in the autobiography, was when I did join Ferrari, and I worked for Ferrari for a year or 2. It was at the back end of 89 when John Barnard left to go to Benetton, and I took over the running of the British operation. Not an engineer, obviously, but took it over. But I had to kind of very quickly understand the engineering of it, because Barnard took all the engineers with him and all the technicians. So there was nobody there, so I had to do a lot of hiring and firing. Not hiring, no firing, hiring in the space of 3 months and get 3 cars built. So we had a lot going on. But in the meantime, the funniest thing was the guy, the Ferrari director that installed me there and showed me what I needed to do in terms of running the company, GTO Limited, was a guy called John Galliano, who was literally, is literally out of what we see Lewis doing there. He always carried this briefcase. He had a long overcoat, scarf, one of those hats, and he'd arrive once a month. He'd come in and he'd go through the books with me, and then he would say, Peter, it's time for you to go to have the coffee. So I'd leave, and I'd leave him in my office for half an hour, and then he would come down and join me in the coffee. And I never knew what he was doing in that half hour. No idea. I never asked. John Galliano. Amazing. Herbert Williams. Did you see Richard Petty driving his white Superbird in the inaugural parade? Was he? Oh, wow. Well, there's one good thing about... Oh, I shouldn't be saying that. Anyway, Richard Petty, NASCAR. Yeah, they're all Trump-ites, aren't they? But speaking of Richard Petty, I was watching... who was it? Was it Bobby Allison? I think it was Bobby Allison. Doing the world lap speed record thing at Talladega. I wanted to watch the Mark Donohue attempt. Well, it was a successful attempt in the 91730. And I hadn't realized that, I know AJ Foyt was the guy he beat, but I hadn't realized before that, I think it was Bobby Allison, or maybe it might have been David Pearson, in a NASCAR Cup car, was the previous holder before Foyt. Yeah, apropos nothing at all. Trishara, Mr. Windsor, who do you think has been a good race leader this season? Also, I think Sao Paulo was a mega drive from Max. Yeah, well, he was, wasn't it? Race leader, still sits in my mind the rhythm and the confidence that Lando had in Miami when he got the lead and the way he won that race. That was pure Rubens Barrichello at his best, into a rhythm and everything just exactly the same every lap. I love watching that. But I mean, how do you actually rate drivers leading a race and how they lead a race? That's being really idiosyncratic, is it not? Because it depends on tires, it depends on strategy, depends on laps to go, depends on how you got there in the first place, depends where you were on the grid. There's a million things there. Sam J says, what are your early predictions, Peter, for the year's top three? I'm not going to predict that, Sam. I'm not that sort of guy. Yes, I am. Let me think about this. I don't know. I'm going to go out on a limb. I mean, and there's not something I want to be held to because I don't feel that strongly about it. But if I wanted to have a real punt, I would say Charles Leclerc, Lando Norris, Max Verstappen. Yeah, right, Windsor. There's no chance it's going to be that. But you're asking me, what can you do? Scroopy's asking a lot of questions today. No problem with that. Peter, given your context, what are the chances of a race coming back to Kyalami in 28? I'm hearing that they want an South African Grand Prix, but it's between Kyalami and a yet non-existent track in Rwanda. Really? Well, you know more than I. All I know is that, talking my contacts, is that good old Dieter Renken, my buddy, is at the FIA in quite a high position, I think, relative to the FIA president. And he's nothing more than a South African who wants to have a South African Grand Prix. So if there's any chance of there being a South African Grand Prix, Dieter will make it happen, I hope. But I don't know any more than that, I'm afraid. I'd love to see it back again at the original Kyalami. And get the Kyalami Ranch operating again, please. Yep. Jelma Vanderlei. When Hadjar doesn't perform, Marco could say, I will sack Hadjar. Well, yeah, he often does say things like that, doesn't he? Sack Hadjar. Sakajar. Okay. I think I know what you're trying to say now. Yeah. Okay. I could Sakajar. Okay. I Sakajar. There you go. Yeah, got it. Road bags. A Ferrari 250 GTO would have been my choice. It's nice to dream. Long or short wheelbase? That's the question. That is the question, isn't it? The iconic one was the Rob Walker Sterling Moss short wheelbase, wasn't it? So they probably wouldn't have wanted in the picture because it was blue and white. Jay Tucker. Any news on Angela and Lewis working together again, or are those rumors? I don't know. Don't know about that. We'll see, I guess. We'll see at the testing, won't we? Right. Gonna have to go fairly soon, folks. I'm a bit surprised at how well this live stream seems to be going technically. I don't seem to have made any, apart from the beginning, it seems to be okay or not. Riley 57, which rookie do you think will have the best season? I'm counting on Liam as a rookie here. Oh, Liam for sure. Liam could win a Grand Prix. Liam will definitely be on the podium. So, in what way wouldn't he be the best rookie if you count him as a rookie? Because he's not a rookie. So that's that. Beyond that, I would say probably Antonelli. Yeah, that's what I meant. The Ferrari Puro sang. Thank you, Max Flash Heart. Puro sangue, pure blood. Yes, I Googled it for the spelling. Haha. Herbert Williams, did you know Phil Hill? I did indeed. I didn't know. I saw Phil race in '65 at Warwick Farm in the second Bruce McLaren Cooper, the older Cooper on the wrong tyres, I recall, when they were painted white with green around the nose. And Phil was sitting quite high in the car, and his overall arms fluttered in the breeze a lot. Didn't look very composed really, but he drove, the car was difficult, so it was quite an edgy car to drive, and he was on the edge all the time. And then I never saw him race after that, but then got to know him very well through Grand Prix tours, where I used to do a lot of talks, mainly at the Italian British Grand Prix, and Phil usually joined those talks because he'd been hosting groups down on trips to Italy, to Modena, Maranello, and they would come up to the Italian Grand Prix and he would join the dinner, and I used to sit next to him quite a lot and chat a lot about his amazing career and his talent and everything about him. He's very intelligent, very quite difficult, I found, to get him to open up about things, and he would always surprise me with a bit of a one-liner about somebody that I'd always rated who he didn't rate particularly highly. Phil was pretty outspoken like that. But I remember the last time actually he spoke to me, he was quite angry with me or cross with me. We were at the BRDC dinner, I think, and I'd referred to Jackie Stewart as the BRDC president when he was the chairman, or chairman when he was the president, one of the two. It was a kind of, does it really matter sort of thing, in my opinion. And he gave me a dressing down for getting his title wrong. And I remember thinking, sorry, Phil. Yeah, I'll do my best next time. But yeah, amazing talent. And didn't look good in the back end of his Formula One career. But then he, in that Chaparral, he was incredible, wasn't he? So good. And he was so good in his early years in the Ferraris. And he was the last guy to win a Formula One race in a front engine car too. I think Italian Grand Prix 1960, when all the British teams boycotted the race. It was his first win, I think. Well, no, it wouldn't have been Avus. No, that was Brooks. No, I think it was his first win. Yeah. It's an amazing YouTube video, actually, of him at that Italian Grand Prix in '60. And it's about Phil doing a live interview after the race. And I think it's sponsored by Dunlop. I think. And he does this interview. So he gets out of the car and does a live interview to the United States after the race. Amazing. It's on YouTube. It was. Probably not there anymore. Phil Hill. Rob Wilson, who's getting a little bit better, a little bit more positive, still very, very seriously ill. But Rob, I'm very pleased to say, is making a little bit of progress as of the speaking. I wish him all the best, of course. Very close to Phil. Did a lot of days with Phil when he came back to do Goodwood. And Phil had enormous respect for Rob, and Rob for Phil, always. In Rob's mind, Phil Hill was one of the great underrated Grand Prix drivers, definitely. Snoopy says, for me, the most iconic Ferrari is the 288 GTO. What a brutal beauty. Reminds me of a young Sophia Loren. It's funny that you mention her, because going through my stuff as well, I came across the 2000 Pirelli calendar, the launch of which I went to at the end of 1999, as you can imagine. And it was at the London History Museum, lovely big gala dinner. The photographer was Annie Leibovitz, and Sophie Loren was featured. And before they said, Miss Loren will not be signing any autographs, I went up to her and got her to sign my menu. And I found it in my stuff that I was going through. Not only the calendar in pristine condition, still in its wrapper, but also the menu from that night, signed by Annie Leibovitz and Sophia Loren. Yeah, wow. The 288 GTO, I think, I'm showing my ignorance here. Is that a V12, I think? Or is it a flat 12? I remember Adrian Newey having, when he was at Williams, I was asking about his road cars, and he said he had a Ferrari 512 BB. Would that be right? I said, wow, Adrian, didn't know you're into Ferraris. And he said, well, it's just the engine. I want the flat 12 engine. I want a car with a flat 12 engine. And Ferrari do it. Logical. And it is. Donahue. Herbert Williams says Donahue. Yeah, wow. One of my great buddies. And I say buddies. I didn't know him before he came over in 75, but we very quickly became friends, I like to think, in the sense that whenever he saw me or I saw him, he'd say, hi, how are you? And shake hands in his lovely, kind way. And his black 911. And I went down to have dinner with him one night down in Poole and went to the pub with him and just got to know him pretty well. Lovely guy. John Bisignano. Do you know John Bisignano? I do indeed. Yeah, good guy. I was never really, it was just before my time. And he was quite a quick Formula 3 driver. Before my time when he was a journalist, I think. But I did know him. No, it's not. Well, I was at Autocar Writing when he was doing stuff for American TV. So yeah, good guy. Nice guy. Jelma Vanderlei. Phillips, Hugh. Maybe saying I need more hue on my face. Is that what it is? I don't know. Foshi Dioje. Does Alonso have a better chance of getting a podium this year than he had last year or worse? You know what? When people were asking me earlier about the surprises this year, I completely forgot about Aston Martin. Probably Freudian slip. So I completely forgot about Aston. And I suppose how Aston are going to go now that Adrian's there is the other big question, isn't it? So please add this on to what I was saying earlier. I knew there was a team I hadn't got around to talking about. And of course, Alonso does have a very good chance of being on the podium. He has a very good chance of winning races this year with Adrian. As I've said before, Adrian isn't just about designing a car and getting good engineers to work with him. He's also about running a car in the pit lane. So regardless of how bad the current Aston Martin is, it will be a better car for sure. And it'll be run better, probably. So there you go. I think Aston Martin will go quite well. They seem to start off the year very well, don't they? Flashout says, the stream has been solid. Amazing. Thank you very much, Flashout. And Erwin Greven says, the deal is done according to the race between Lewis and Angelo. Big news. Trishala, Mr. Windsor, my earlier question said reader, as in reading a race and anticipating next moves. Oh, sorry, I thought it said leader. Also, thank you for answering our questions. Reading a race. Okay. Well, that's not so esoteric, is it? Reading a race. Who's good at reading a race? Max, for sure. I think anybody that's capable of staying out of trouble in the first couple of laps and then scything through the field to finish on the podium is good at reading a race. That's my definition of reading a race. It's being slow enough to be able to be in a position to do what you know you can do later in the race. As Carlos used to say, to have an ability to think of the last lap when you're on your first lap. And that is reading a race really well. Nicky used to do that incredibly well. Prost did that very well. And I think Max does that very well. It's more difficult these days because of the strategy and the pit stops and everything else and advent of safety cars and all the variables that can come into play. So reading a race isn't as fine an art as it used to be, a bit like overtaking back markers. It's more about knowing how slowly you can go in order to survive, in order to be where you need to be at the end of the race, in my view. Lornet says, Happy New Year to you and your family. Thank you very much. And to Dexter included in that. He's sleeping still. Did a long walk with him before we did the video. I'm going to have to pack it in soon, boys. I say pack it in. I really should say pack it in. Because I remember when I came over to England in 71, very briefly, my sister was getting married and I came over for the wedding. And I was still a young punk, obviously. But I went to as many motor racing things as I could. And one of the things was to go to Goodwood, even though it was a defunct circuit with no activities of the type we know and love today. And the day I chose was freezing cold. It was all in November, December. And John Surtees was there, would you believe, with the Formula One Surtees. And I stood there watching and stood right next to the car. And he was going in and out of the pits. And I just couldn't believe I was watching John Surtees at Goodwood, testing at Goodwood. Anyway, I remember he came in at the end. It was still light, obviously. It was probably half an hour to go. And the engine sounded a bit rattly. And I remember he got out of the car, took off his helmet. And I said, I think we should peg it in now, boys. The spigots come off the camshaft. And so I often say to my son, Jack, come on, Jack, let's peg it in. He knows exactly what I mean. Lornet says, how do Isaac Hadjar, Ollie Berman, and the Great Kimi compare? I'm glad you're calling him the Great Kimi as well, in terms of short corners. Pass on Hadjar. He looks pretty neat and tidy. Don't want to really make a comment about him yet until I really have a good look at him. Sounds a bit pompous, but till we have a good look at him might be a little bit better. Ollie Berman, definitely not short corners so far. Pretty wide entries, very nice touch, but I would say Rubens Barrichello-esque. And the Great Kimi. Kimi definitely shorter corners than Ollie Berman, definitely. And pretty good. Kimi at the moment is about where Oscar was when Oscar was trying his short corners. And the jury's out as to whether he will continue in that direction or get influenced by George and maybe go back a little bit as Oscar has with Lando. Who's the most underrated driver in DTM or was DTM that you think wasted his potential due to bad luck maybe? Matthias Ekstrom always looked very good, didn't he? I was amazed that he never got an F1 opportunity. Giancadella, I think, was good. I see he's got a test deal. He's got some sort of sim deal with one of the F1 teams. Is it with Mercedes maybe? I can't remember. But yeah, I always thought Giancadella was good. Jamie Green, going back a little bit now, I think was very underrated too. There you go. DTM. How do Isaac Hadjar, Ollie Berman, and the Great Kimi? We've done that one. Dawood Wasim. Charles in Monza, Austin, and Abu Dhabi read races very well this year. Yeah. I mean, they all read races well, but I mean, they're pretty much managed by the pit wall, aren't they? And what's going to happen with safety cars and what to do. Charles in Monza. I think that was more a case of McLaren reading the race unbelievably badly at Monza rather than Charles reading it beautifully, because, you know, Charles just did what was logical, whereas McLaren did what was completely illogical at Monza and thrashed their tyres to pieces to the point where they had to make a second pit stop. Yeah, Abu Dhabi was good. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, who was good? Was a good energy at Maranello, Alex G. Snoopy says, if Peter Fantinelli is either as fast or very close to George Russell right out of the gate, how secure is George? I think George, they're not going to faff around and change more. I think George is pretty secure in that seat for a while. And I think, you know, I just can't imagine they'll try and get Max. If they got George, get rid of George, have Max. Why would Max go to Mercedes again? You know, you come down to those old arguments. I just can't see that happening. You know what? I think I might almost have got to the bottom of the things. This is amazing. I'm just going to finish it now. Snoopy, 26 Mercedes will be a banger again. What's that mean? Good? A bad car? Banger. I think it's probably a bad car. Doesn't seem to be much of a confidence builder when your boss is constantly having an eye out to replace you as the number one. Well, you know, I think team owners in general who play around with drivers' careers have a lot to answer for and are probably the wrong people to be doing that. You know, they certainly don't do enough homework and actually what makes a driver tick as a human being and as a racing driver, and what they do well in a car and what they don't do well. We've seen that, too much evidence of that over the years. So there we go. Good. Great live stream. Thank you so much, everybody, for, I say great live stream. Great live stream from my point of view, because I've been able to sort of see what everybody's thinking and doing, and we've talked about hopefully some really fun things as well. I'll be doing some more, but as I say, tomorrow we're driving up to Gap starting the drive to Gap to France to watch the Monte Carlo Rally this weekend. So that's going to be brilliant. And I might do a few YouTube shorts or something up there. I don't know. See how it goes, because I'm really looking forward to that. Really, it's going to be brilliant. The Hyundais, the Toyotas on the Col de Torini. Wow, fabulous. So everybody, thanks very much for watching. I'll be back again soon. Have a wonderful 2025. Take care.